I used to think quiet meant peaceful, that if a life was small enough, careful enough, nothing bad could reach inside it. My world was a narrow one, built from routine and habit, from early mornings and tired evenings, from the steady rhythm of survival that leaves little room for dreaming. I lived in a modest house with peeling paint and a roof that complained every rainy season, but it was mine, and more importantly, it was my son's. Everything I did, every choice I made, bent gently and stubbornly toward him. I raised my son alone. That sentence sounds simple, almost brave, but it hides years of invisible labor. His father disappeared early, leaving behind excuses instead of money, promises instead of presence. There was no dramatic goodbye, no final argument, just silence and the sudden understanding that if I didn't stand up, no one else would. I became mother, father, teacher, nurse, and shield, often all in the same day. My life settled into patterns that felt stable from the outside. I woke before dawn, cooked breakfast, walked him to school, then worked long hours that paid just enough to keep us afloat. At night, I counted coins at the kitchen table and told myself tomorrow would be easier. It rarely was. Still, I learned to smile through exhaustion because my son believed the world was safe, and I wanted to keep it that way for as long as possible. The house became the quiet center of everything. I scrubbed its floors until my knees ached, patched its walls with borrowed tools, and ignored my own hunger to pay the bills on time. Each repair was a small victory against chaos. Each month we stayed was proof that we had survived again. To my son, it was simply home. To me, it was every sacrifice made visible in wood and cement. There were nights I sat alone after he fell asleep, listening to the house breathe around me. Those were the moments when loneliness crept in, soft and persistent. I missed being seen. I missed being asked how I was holding up. But I told myself that love meant endurance, that real mothers didn't complain. So I swallowed my needs and folded them neatly away, the way I folded his clothes, careful not to let the seams show. As he grew older, the balance shifted without warning. He needed me less, trusted me differently. I watched his confidence bloom while mine quietly withered. I was proud of him, fiercely so, yet afraid of the space opening between us. Stability had always depended on closeness, on shared struggle. Now his life was expanding beyond the small, careful world I had built. When he married, I told myself this was the reward for everything I had done. A good man, starting his own family. I smiled at the wedding and clapped at the right moments, even when I felt strangely displaced, like a guest in a story I once carried alone. I reassured myself that love multiplies, that there is room for everyone. But small signs unsettled me. Phone calls grew shorter. Decisions were made without my voice. Conversations shifted toward plans that didn't include me. I told myself I was imagining things, that change was natural, that mothers must learn to step back. Still, late at night, in the quiet house that no longer felt entirely secure, I sensed that the stability I fought so hard to protect was beginning to tilt, and I didn't yet know how far it would fall. I began noticing how often I defended him to myself. When friends asked why he hadn't visited, I laughed it off. When relatives hinted that I should think about my own future, I brushed it aside. My future, I believed, was already decided. It lived in that house, in the walls that had witnessed his first steps and his teenage rebellions, in the kitchen where we argued and forgave each other 100 times. I assumed those memories were shared ownership, something no one could take. There was comfort in routine, even as it grew quieter. I kept cooking the same meals, cleaning the same rooms, pretending that constancy could hold everything in place. Stability felt like loyalty, like proof that my sacrifices had meant something. Yet beneath it, a faint unease followed me from room to room, whispering that love given without limits can slowly erase the giver. I did not yet have words for that fear. I only felt it in my chest when I heard his wife speak confidently about plans, or when he nodded along instead of looking at me. I told myself to be grateful, to be patient, to remember my place. But in the stillness of that house, I sensed the first hairline crack forming, and I had no idea it would soon split my world in two. At the time, I believed silence was kindness. I believed stepping back was love. I believed that if I stayed quiet, stayed small, nothing precious would be disturbed. I did not understand that silence can invite loss, and that stability built on unspoken sacrifice can be rewritten by someone else's pen. The shift was subtle, almost gentle, but it was already underway, carrying my son toward a future where my place was no longer certain. I sensed change approaching, before it found words at night. I remember those years as a long hallway with no windows, only doors I kept pushing open. They were the years when my son was small and the world felt heavy. Every morning I woke before the sun and borrowed strength from the dark. By the time he opened his eyes, I had already spent mine. I learned to move quietly, to make sacrifice sound like normal life. That was how I kept him safe. I hid the weight so he could run unburdened through his days. Even when my body begged me to stop, I never listened. Back then, I worked jobs that never asked my name, only my time and my silence. Factories, kitchens, cleaning floors that shone briefly before being dirtied again. I skipped meals so he could have seconds and pretended hunger was discipline. At night, exhaustion pressed into my bones like cold. I counted money twice, sometimes 3 times, hoping numbers might change if I stared long enough. They rarely did. Still, I told myself this was temporary, that endurance was a bridge. I believed crossing it would lead us somewhere gentle. That belief kept me upright. Most days, barely, but always moving. Forward alone. The house was never just walls to me. It was a promise hammered into shape. Every repair marked a season of survival. I patched leaks with borrowed tools and borrowed courage. When the roof held through storms, I felt briefly victorious. My son played on the floor while I worked, unaware of the math behind each nail. He believed houses simply existed. I knew they had to be fought for. That difference defined our lives. I guarded his innocence with my exhaustion. It was the only inheritance I could afford. At the time, it felt enough, or so I thought. There were days I borrowed money from neighbors and pried from nowhere. I promised repayment with a confidence I did not feel. My son never noticed the tension in my voice. To him, I was simply there, reliable as the walls, constant as the meals. Sometimes I lay awake counting his breaths, wondering how long I could keep this illusion alive. I told myself gratitude would come later when he was older. Love does not ask for receipts. I believed that deeply. It was enough to be needed. Even if I disappeared in the process, that was the bargain I accepted. As he grew, his needs changed, but the pressure did not. School uniforms replaced toys. Books replaced cartoons. Each milestone came with a quiet calculation I kept to myself. I smiled at his achievements while tightening my belt another notch. He talked about dreams, about what he would become. I listened like they were promises made to both of us. In my mind, his future was proof that my sacrifices mattered. I imagined a day when he would look back and understand. I imagined gratitude as something natural, something that bloomed on its own. No one warned me it had to be taught. Teenage years brought distance and doors closed softly, then firmly. I respected his privacy even when it hurt. I told myself this was growth, not loss. He came home later, spoke less, leaned toward a world I could not follow. I was proud of his independence, even as it left me more alone. The house stayed the same, but its rooms felt larger, emptier. I kept maintaining it, polishing its floors, fixing its cracks, as if effort could preserve closeness. He noticed none of it. Why would he? Safety feels invisible when it works. There were moments I almost spoke, almost told him how hard it was, how thin my strength had become. But I swallowed those words. I did not want to burden him with the cost of his comfort. Mothers are taught that silence is love, so I practiced it until it felt natural. I told myself he owed me nothing. That love freely given should expect nothing in return. I did not realize how dangerous that belief could become. I did not see how easily sacrifice can be mistaken for obligation by others. The older he became, the more I faded into the background of his life. He still lived under my roof, ate at my table, but his attention was elsewhere. Friends, plans, possibilities. I watched him pack pieces of himself for the future while I stayed rooted in maintenance mode. The house stood solid, a testament to years of holding on. I assumed it would always be ours, shared by history, protected by memory. I never imagined it could be redefined by paperwork instead of love. When he finally stepped into adulthood, I felt both relief and fear. Relief that my hardest work was done. Fear that without his dependence, my role would shrink. He spoke of moving forward, of building something new. I nodded and encouraged him, even as my chest tightened. I had built everything backward, starting with nothing and ending with a home. He would build forward, starting with support and ending wherever he chose. I trusted that our paths remained connected. I did not yet understand how easily independence becomes distance. Looking back, those years were a masterclass in endurance. I survived on faith, habit, and the belief that love would be enough. I taught him how to walk through the world safely, but I never taught him what it cost. I assumed he would feel it anyway. As he stepped further into his own life, I stayed behind, maintaining the quiet world I had created for him. I thought the hardest part was over. I did not see the emotional distance growing, or how silence was slowly rewriting what we owed each other. I met her on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of day that looks harmless until it changes everything. I noticed how my son's voice lifted when he said her name, and how something quietly shifted inside me before I understood why. I smiled anyway, already practicing letting go. Slowly, carefully. I told myself this was normal, that children grow toward love that isn't theirs to keep. I welcomed her politely, warmly, as if kindness could cover the unease I wouldn't name. I listened more than I spoke, learning my new position without complaint. It felt necessary, proper, adult, expected, final. Love began to rearrange the room. He called less, visited briefly, and shared news as if I were an audience, not a partner. I praised their happiness, swallowed my questions, and reminded myself that grace means stepping back without being asked. I kept standing, still, quiet, trying, smiling, alone, inside. At the wedding, I sat near the edge of my own life. I clapped, laughed, and posed for photos while feeling oddly transparent. He looked at her the way he once looked at me. I told myself this was success, not loss. My heart disagreed, softly, patiently, quietly, learning again. I tried to fit myself into the space they offered, careful not to overstep. I asked before visiting, waited for invitations, and accepted silence as busyness. Trust became a discipline, unease a secret. I chose faith over fear daily. Some days were harder, lonelier, longer, quieter. Still, I persisted, always. She was pleasant, confident, and certain. I admired that even as I noticed how decisions shifted direction. Money talks excluded me, plans formed elsewhere. I told myself influence is not erasure. Still, I felt the edges soften, fade, subtly, gradually. Naturally, they said, I nodded, accepted, smiled, swallowed, endured, quietly. He defended her quickly, automatically, as if practice made it true. I recognized the tone immediately. I once used it myself. I praised their unity and pretended not to miss our old rhythm. Loyalty had moved, quietly, decisively, without discussion. I stood back. Again, 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 learning, enduring, alone, still. I kept telling myself replacement was not real, that love adds, never subtracts, but fear is patient. It waits for quiet moments to speak. I heard it when my phone stayed silent, when holidays changed. When my opinions didn't matter, I pretended it was nothing. Temporary, normal, healthy, necessary, right. The house felt different then. Still standing, still mine, yet no longer centered. Conversations about money grew frequent. I listened from doorways, learning what was discussed without me. Trust required blindness. I practiced it. Too well. Something was changing. I felt it. Named nothing. Asked nothing. Prepared for nothing. Yet. I believed stepping back was wisdom. I believed silence was respect. I believed my role was complete. These beliefs made me smaller. They also made me easy to ignore. I didn't see how quickly that would matter. Later, I would understand. For now, I smiled, stepped back, trusted, waited, quietly. Marriage changed the center of gravity. I felt myself pulled outward, orbiting edges. He built a new world while I maintained the old. I believed both could exist. I believed wrong. I didn't know yet. The distance felt polite, reasonable, defensible, temporary, I told myself. Often, daily, faithfully, quietly, alone. I stood in doorways often, watching their confidence grow. I praised it, encouraged it, never questioned it. My fear learned new language, acceptance. I told myself this was love. It felt like practice, preparation. For something I didn't yet name, but I felt it approaching. Slowly, quietly, inevitably, closer, now. Change announced itself through small things. Questions about bills, casual mentions of ownership. I listened carefully, said little. My role felt uncertain. I told myself this was marriage. Natural, adult, normal, but my unease grew, quietly, persistently, without permission. I noticed everything, remembered everything, prepared for nothing. Still, waiting, patient. I wanted to believe my place was secure. Years of sacrifice felt undeniable. But security requires recognition. I had none, only history. I trusted history. I shouldn't have, not alone. Marriage rewrites priorities. I learned that slowly, too slowly. With hope, with faith, with silence, always, quietly, watching, waiting, still. I never blamed her. That truth matters. I blamed my assumptions, my silence, my belief that love protects itself. I didn't realize love also needs boundaries. I had none, not yet. They came later, after loss, after shock, after papers, after truth. Not now. Now I trusted, believed, waited, quietly. I watched him become a husband with pride. I watched myself become peripheral. That hurt more than I expected. I hid it well. I was trained. Years of practice. Endurance. Silence had kept us safe before. I believed it still could. I didn't see danger. Not yet. Not clearly. Soon. The shift wasn't cruel. That made it worse. It was reasonable, defensible, easy to justify. I had no language for complaint, so I didn't. I adapted, smiled, stepped aside again. Each time I told myself this was love, mature, proper, selfless, necessary, even good. I believed, I trusted, I waited. Distance doesn't announce itself with noise. It arrives politely. I accepted it politely. I stood in the background, applauding. I told myself I was lucky. I was still included. Sometimes. Less often, less deeply. But enough, I said. Enough, enough, enough. I didn't ask for more, yet, not knowing. Better. I began to understand that marriage creates teams. I was no longer on his. That realization settled slowly. I told myself this was healthy, necessary, right. I trusted him. I trusted us. I shouldn't have. Trust without conversation is fragile. I didn't know that. Not then, not yet. Soon. Very. Her influence grew visible. Not hostile, not unkind, just present. I watched him defer. I learned new silences, new rules. I respected them. I respected everyone, even myself, or I thought. The house listened. So did I change approached. Quietly, carefully, with papers, with numbers, with authority, nearer, closer, now. I stood between trust and unease, choosing trust daily. It felt like love. It felt like obedience. I didn't separate them. I was afraid to, so I let things happen. Money entered conversations. So did property. I listened. Stayed quiet, believed, trusted, waited, again, 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 until I couldn't. Yet. I told myself this was the price of grace. Stepping back, smiling, trusting. I didn't know grace without boundaries invites loss. I was about to learn. The house would teach me. Soon, very soon, money and property would speak. Louder, clearer, final. I was still quiet, still trusting, still waiting. I have always believed a house remembers. It remembers footsteps, arguments, laughter, and the way fear sounds at night. This house remembers me before I was tired, before my hair thinned and my voice softened. It remembers a young woman scrubbing floors at midnight, promising a sleeping child that tomorrow would be better. To anyone else, it was just a building. To me, it was proof that survival could be shaped by hand. Every wall held a choice. Every crack held a story. I thought memory itself made ownership permanent. Forever, unquestioned, immune to signatures, stamps, and sudden change alone. That house rose slowly, the way my life did, one paycheck at a time. One repair delayed, then forced. I fixed leaks with borrowed ladders and patched walls after he slept. When storms came, I stood listening, praying the roof would hold. It always did. I believed that meant something. Each improvement felt like a victory over fear. I planted hope beside the foundation and watered it with exhaustion. My son never noticed the labor. He noticed safety. That was the point. Protection costs more than money. But I paid gladly, repeatedly, without witnesses for years, without complaint or recognition. The kitchen held our arguments and reconciliations. I taught him numbers at that table, then watched him outgrow them. Birthdays passed with homemade cakes and careful smiles. I measured joy in small moments because large ones were expensive. The house absorbed it all, good and bad, without asking anything back. I believed it belonged to us because we belonged to it. Belonging felt mutual. It felt earned. I never imagined belonging could be overridden by paper. No document could outweigh years of love, labor, and survival. I assumed. Assumptions feel safe until someone profits from your silence without warning signs. I remember the first time I sensed something shifting. Papers appeared on the counter, neatly stacked, moved when I entered. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. My son answered questions with smiles that didn't reach his eyes. I told myself I was imagining it. After all, the house was mine. Ours, built through decades of strain. No one had ever asked me to sign anything. That comfort blinded me. Emotional ownership feels solid until legality speaks another language. I still trusted love more than systems, memory more than contracts. Trust delayed questions I should have asked much earlier, but fear discouraged them completely. The house held echoes of my parents' voices, my son's first cry, my own whispered prayers. It was inheritance created, not given. I assumed that gave me protection. I did not understand how easily devotion can be reframed as generosity owed, rather than sacrifice earned. The word entitlement never crossed my mind. I believed love settled debts automatically. That belief made me careless. I didn't guard what mattered because I thought it guarded itself. History felt heavier than ink, stronger than law, more honest than intent. I was wrong, and the house already knew it long before I did fully. Maintenance became ritual. I replaced worn hinges, repainted faded rooms, fixed what time eroded. I spoke to the house as if it could answer. It answered by standing. Meanwhile, conversations about money grew casual, detached from history. I listened quietly, assuming my presence was understood. No one asked me what the house meant. They discussed what it was worth. That difference frightened me, though I struggled to name why. Value spoken without memory feels sharp, transactional, capable of harm. I told myself I was overreacting, imagining threats where none existed. Silence became my shield and my mistake at once simultaneously. Sometimes I caught my son watching me, measuring something unspoken. I wondered what he saw: a mother, a past, an asset. The question terrified me. The house, once a symbol of devotion, began to feel like a possession others could claim. Emotional legacy felt fragile against legal clarity. I began to feel like a guest in my own history, present but powerless, familiar yet easily dismissed. Belonging without authority is temporary, subject to reinterpretation by others. I had given everything, yet retained no formal proof of that giving. Love had no paperwork. Sacrifice left no signatures. I ignored that fact. The house kept secrets I assumed were safe. Repairs, receipts, memories. I believed presence equaled permission. I did not notice how often plans were made elsewhere. I overheard words like transfer and security spoken lightly. My name never appeared. I told myself it would. I told myself love doesn't erase history, but history requires witnesses. I was becoming invisible. Invisibility is dangerous when ownership is questioned and authority is being reassigned. I remained silent, believing silence had protected us before and might again. It never occurred to me that silence can be interpreted as consent in matters of law especially. Every object inside those walls carried meaning I could not itemize. Scratches from moving furniture, marks where his height was measured. The house was my autobiography, yet legality does not read emotion. It reads names, documents, dates. I began to understand that what I felt was not what mattered. What mattered was what was written. That realization crept slowly, chilling my confidence. Emotion cannot defend itself in offices or courts. I still hoped history would speak louder than paperwork, foolishly. Hope is stubborn. It resists evidence until loss forces clarity. I wasn't ready for clarity yet. It was approaching fast. The warning signs were polite. Too polite to confront, too subtle to accuse. A stranger visited once asking questions about property lines. I wasn't consulted. Later, an envelope appeared addressed to my son. I didn't open it. Trust stopped me. That choice would haunt me. The house seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the truth to arrive. I mistook restraint for wisdom and patience for protection. Belief kept me calm while decisions moved forward without me. I didn't know how close I was to losing everything I thought secure. The moment was coming. I could feel it clearly now. I continued caring for the house as if effort could anchor ownership. I cleaned, repaired, protected. I treated it like a living promise. But promises without witnesses dissolve. I sensed the ending approaching, carried in casual tones and sealed envelopes. Emotional ownership gave comfort. Legal vulnerability waited patiently. The house and I stood together, unaware which of us would be claimed. I trusted history. History did not protect me. Protection requires acknowledgement, and acknowledgement had quietly disappeared. I was about to learn that love alone cannot stop paperwork. The house waited. So did I, powerless on the edge of truth. The day everything changed did not arrive with shouting. It arrived softly, a voice through a door, a document held too casually, a name missing. In that instant, decades of memory collided with ink, emotional ownership shattered against legal reality. I understood then that survival had not guaranteed security. It had only delayed loss. The house had been speaking. I finally listened. That moment would divide my life into before and after. I was no longer safe inside what I built. Something irreversible had begun, and I was unprepared to face it. The truth was stepping forward now without mercy. I stood frozen, realizing the house I loved could be reassigned with ease. Belonging had limits I never learned. Entitlement wears politeness like armor. In that silence, I felt the ground shift. A visitor would come, papers would surface, a conversation would expose everything. I did not know when, only that it was close. The quiet years had ended. The next sound would change my life. I was about to hear it whether I wanted to or not. The house waited. So did betrayal, dressed as reason. Everything I trusted was standing on the brink of revelation and loss now. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind that pretends nothing important is waiting. My son stood in the doorway holding papers like groceries, casual, almost bored. His wife sat at the table scrolling her phone. No one looked nervous. No one looked guilty. He said my name the way people do before delivering weather. I listened, smiling, because smiles had always been my armor. Then he said the house would be transferred for security, just paperwork, nothing to worry about. My world collapsed quietly, folding inward without sound, while they waited for my approval as if it were expected. I asked him to repeat it, gently, politely, the way I asked everything. He sighed, already tired, already defensive. He said it made sense that marriage required stability, that love meant sharing assets. He spoke in rehearsed sentences like answers practiced in advance. His wife nodded without meeting my eyes. I waited for loyalty to appear, for him to remember the nights I skipped meals, the years I carried alone. Instead, he explained benefits, protections, futures. My sacrifices became background noise. One signature outweighed decades of giving. It felt surgical, efficient, final, and cold. No apology followed. No hesitation either. I sat down slowly, afraid my legs would fail me. My hands shook, not from anger but disbelief. This house was never a gift, it was survival. I had built it with exhaustion and hope, not money. I reminded him of that quietly. He frowned, confused, as if I were changing the subject. He said emotions shouldn't complicate practical decisions. In that moment, I understood how easily sacrifice is erased when it lacks documentation. Love had never asked for proof. Law did, and it was unforgiving. No one prepared me for that truth. It settled heavily inside my chest then. They spoke softly, as if kindness could soften theft. He said I could stay a while, of course, nothing would change immediately. The word immediately rang louder than shouting. Permission replaced belonging in a single breath. I heard myself thanking him, trained reflex overriding dignity. His wife smiled, relieved. I realized the decision had been made long before this conversation. I was late to my own erasure, invited only to consent. That courtesy cut deeper than cruelty ever could. Because cruelty expects resistance, courtesy expects silence. I gave it automatically without protest. Years of training answered for me, not wisdom, habit. I searched his face for shame, for doubt, for memory. I found none. He looked reasonable, calm, certain. He believed he was being fair. That belief terrified me. Fairness without gratitude is a weapon. I remembered carrying him through fevers, choosing rent over rest, hope over despair. None of that mattered now. He spoke of futures I was not part of, framed as protection. I saw how a lifetime of giving can be rebranded as obligation, then dismissed. Greed rarely names itself greed. It wears logic and smiles. I felt very old suddenly, and very small too, inside that room. I wanted to scream, but my voice stayed disciplined. Shock froze me, then disbelief warmed into pain. I asked when this was decided. He hesitated, then said it had been discussed for months. Months, while I cleaned the house, repaired doors, planned holidays. Time became an accomplice. I realized my loyalty had been used against me. Silence had made everything easier for them. My trust had smoothed the path of my own dispossession. That realization felt heavier than loss itself. Loss implies accident. This was intention, carefully justified, politely executed, without cruelty, without apology, just paperwork and smiles, and waiting. I left the room and stood in the hallway, touching the wall like a witness. The house felt distant, suddenly unfaithful. I realized love had not protected me from greed, it had disguised it. My expectations of loyalty shattered quietly. I had believed gratitude was inevitable. It is not. It is optional. That truth cut deeper than anger. I questioned every sacrifice, every silent night, every moment I chose him over myself. Doubt crept in, cruel and persistent. Had I taught him this entitlement? Or had silence done it? I blamed myself instinctively. Pain looks for familiar targets. I obliged. Disbelief kept me upright. I replayed the conversation, searching for misunderstanding. Maybe I heard wrong. Maybe protection meant inclusion. Hope argued with reality until exhaustion won. I understood then how easily power shifts when one party assumes loyalty and the other plans advantage. I had raised him to survive, not to remember who carried him. That omission returned now, demanding payment. The taking required only one act. The giving had taken a lifetime. That imbalance felt obscene and irreversible. I finally saw the math clearly. Decades minus love equals nothing. On paper, anyway. Emotion doesn't enter equations. I learned. Hard. They waited for my response. I nodded because nodding had kept peace before. Inside, something broke permanently. Shock gave way to disbelief, disbelief to grief. I felt stripped of history, reduced to inconvenience. The house no longer recognized me, or perhaps it did, and that hurt worse. I saw myself clearly then, generous, silent, expendable. I did not argue. I absorbed the blow, unsure whether surviving it meant strength or failure. My life paused between breaths. They mistook my quiet for acceptance. It was shock, not consent. Consent requires understanding. I had none yet, only pain and questions, so many. That night alone, disbelief unraveled into self-questioning. I asked myself where I went wrong, how love became leverage. I blamed my silence, my softness, my faith in family. The betrayal felt surgical because it was justified. No anger, no cruelty, only reason. Reason can be merciless. I wondered if I deserved this for believing sacrifice guaranteed loyalty. Doubt gnawed relentlessly. When trust collapses quietly, it leaves no debris, only emptiness. I felt hollowed out carefully. As if damage were intentional, questions multiplied without answers. Who was I now? A mother without shelter, a past without protection, a future uncertain, waiting. I replayed years searching for signs. There were none obvious, which hurt more. This was not rage or revenge, it was convenience. That made it colder. A lifetime of care traded for efficiency. I realized loyalty expected is fragile. Loyalty discussed is negotiable. Loyalty enforced by silence disappears. My belief in automatic gratitude collapsed. It was never promised. I had assumed. Assumptions do not survive contracts. I understood that now, painfully late. Understanding offered no comfort. Only clarity sharpened pain. I was not naive, I was trusting. Trust had become liability. That truth settled heavily, inside my aging bones, finally. By morning, shock had shaped itself into resolve's shadow. I did not yet know what I would do, only that I could not remain silent. Disbelief had forced reflection, reflection demanded truth. I saw the path ahead dimly, lined with confrontation and loss. Self-questioning burned, but it also clarified. Silence had protected others, not me. The taking was done. The giving could stop. Something inside me stirred, fragile but alive. The next step would require my voice. I was afraid, but awake. Awakening hurts before healing. I accepted that cost. The story was shifting. I would not disappear, not quietly. I went quiet after that day, the way people do when noise would finish what shock began. Silence felt safer than truth. I replayed my life like evidence, searching for the moment I failed as a mother. Every sacrifice turned suspect. Every kindness looked excessive. I asked myself if love had spoiled him, if protection had weakened him, if endurance had taught entitlement. Outside, life continued comfortably for others. Inside, guilt took up residence. I folded it into routines, brewed it with tea, slept beside it. Injustice hovered outside my door, but blame lived with me quietly every single night. I questioned everything I had done instinctively. The nights I worked late, the meals I skipped, the boundaries I softened. I wondered if gratitude needed instruction, not assumption. I wondered if silence had trained him to take. Truth waited patiently, but I kept choosing quiet because quiet had once kept us alive. Shame grew where anger should have lived. Others moved forward easily, planning futures, signing papers, sleeping soundly. I lay awake measuring failure. I wore responsibility like punishment, believing blame was safer than confronting betrayal directly. I hid inside it, avoiding reality and my own voice for a while. I remembered advice never given, lessons never spoken aloud. I taught him survival, not accountability. I modeled strength, not boundaries. That realization hurt more than loss. Injustice sat clearly outside me, signed and justified, yet I turned inward, dissecting myself instead. Silence became discipline again. I avoided conversations, declined visits, answered calls briefly. I smiled so no one asked questions. Comfort followed others. Shame followed me. I carried it carefully, like something fragile I had broken myself and could never repair. Each day I shrank, believing disappearance was deserved penance for loving without limits or protection from future harm alone. I compared myself to mothers who demanded respect. I judged myself harshly for not doing the same. I believed self-blame was humility, not fear. Silence kept the peace, I told myself, even as it corroded me. Truth knocked softly, I pretended not to hear. Others enjoyed comfort built on my quiet compliance. I cleaned, cooked, maintained routines, pretending usefulness equaled worth. Inside, questions screamed. Outside, I remained composed. I was disappearing in plain sight, convincing myself that this disappearance was earned. I practiced invisibility daily, mistaking endurance for moral strength while injustice remained untouched, unquestioned, and externally rewarded by others. Days blurred together as I avoided mirrors. I feared recognizing someone weak. I replayed childhood scenes, searching for excess softness. Did I rescue too quickly? Forgive too easily? Protect too completely? Each question accused me. Meanwhile, they moved comfortably, discussing plans, rearranging futures. The contrast burned. I lived with consequences while others enjoyed outcomes. Silence protected them, not me. Yet I maintained it, believing truth would destroy what little connection remained. Shame convinced me survival required submission. I mistook endurance for virtue again. My voice stayed, locked behind fear and old habits that once saved us both long ago before. At night, memories argued with reality. I remembered promises never made, loyalty expected without agreement. I realized how unfair that was, yet I punished myself anyway. External injustice felt abstract, internal guilt felt personal. I chose the familiar pain. Silence wrapped around me like tradition. I told myself mothers endure quietly. That belief kept me still. Others slept peacefully. I counted cracks in the ceiling. The house listened without judgment. I apologized to walls for failing, even as paperwork rewrote my life without me. This isolation felt earned, deserved, and strangely safer than confrontation or truth spoken aloud to anyone. I avoided friends who asked questions. Curiosity felt like accusation. I protected others from my pain, believing privacy was dignity. In truth, it was fear. Fear of hearing confirmation. Fear of anger. Fear of losing even temporary shelter. I minimized the betrayal, reframed it as misunderstanding. That reframing consumed energy. Meanwhile, injustice remained unchanged. Silence served everyone except me. Yet I stayed quiet, convincing myself endurance was noble. I believed if I suffered quietly, the universe would balance itself eventually. It did not. Balance requires voice. Mine remained buried beneath guilt and practiced obedience from years of surviving alone quietly. Time passed without mercy. I existed between past and loss, replaying scenes endlessly. I blamed softness, generosity, patience. I never blamed greed directly. Numbing it felt dangerous. Safer to accuse myself. That pattern was familiar. It had kept me alive once. Now it imprisoned me. I felt ashamed of needing help, ashamed of anger, ashamed of wanting fairness. Others enjoyed comfort while I rehearsed apologies I never owed. Silence became habit. Habit became cage. I sat inside it, shrinking, questioning whether I deserved protection, respect, or basic security after decades of giving everything without condition to family and home alone. I watched comfort move through rooms that once sheltered me. Laughter returned without me. Plans formed without consultation. I stayed silent, cataloging fault. Injustice felt distant, guilt felt intimate. That contrast kept me frozen. Truth waited, but I avoided it. I feared that speaking would confirm my disposability. Silence offered illusion of belonging. I accepted it. Each day, dignity slipped further away. I noticed, yet did nothing. Self-blame was easier than confronting how little I mattered to them now. This realization hollowed me, but I still resisted acknowledging betrayal because numbing it would require action I feared more than loss. Then something small broke the spell. Not rage, not shouting, a quiet dismissal. A comment that reminded me I was temporary. It cut through guilt cleanly. For the first time, blame loosened. Reality stood undeniable. Silence could no longer protect me. Injustice stepped closer, personal and immediate. I felt fear sharpen into clarity. The next moment would demand response. I could no longer survive quietly. Something inside me shifted, preparing to speak, even if my voice trembled. That moment would arrive suddenly, forcing truth into daylight through words or threats I could no longer ignore, and reality would follow immediately. I didn't wake up brave. I woke up tired of being afraid. Courage didn't arrive as confidence, it arrived as exhaustion. The kind that settles so deeply you stop protecting what is already hurting you. I sat at the kitchen table that morning, hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea, and realized silence was no longer preserving love. It was erasing me. The fear of losing my son had ruled me for years. That fear had shaped my obedience. Now it stood opposite something stronger, the need to recognize myself again. I rehearsed nothing. Words rehearsed too carefully sound like surrender. I chose honesty instead, uncertain and unpolished. My voice trembled when I called him, but it didn't disappear. That alone felt like progress. I asked to talk, not demanded. I reminded myself that dignity does not require volume. It requires clarity. For once, I did not apologize for needing the conversation. That felt unfamiliar, almost disloyal, but I held the feeling anyway. When we sat down, I felt the old instinct rise, the urge to soften, to reassure, to protect him from discomfort. Maternal instinct whispered that love means absorbing pain quietly. I listened, then refused. Boundaries are not abandonment. I told myself that repeatedly. I spoke slowly, choosing truth over habit. I said the house was my life's work. I said decisions had been made without me. I said permission is not the same as belonging. My voice shook, but it held. He looked surprised. That hurt more than anger would have. Surprise meant he hadn't expected resistance. I saw how submission had shaped his expectations. That realization sharpened my resolve. I was not attacking him. I was numbing myself. I told him I felt erased. I told him silence had been mistaken for agreement. I told him I loved him, but love without respect destroys both people. Saying that felt like stepping onto unfamiliar ground without armor. I stayed standing anyway. He interrupted once. I raised my hand gently and continued. Courage does not shout. It persists. I explained how fear had kept me quiet, how shame had convinced me I deserved less. I said that survival had taught me endurance, not boundaries. I admitted my mistakes without accepting blame for his choices. That distinction mattered. It reclaimed something essential. I was no longer apologizing for existing. I was asserting that my life carried weight beyond usefulness. For a moment, the room felt suspended. I expected anger. Instead, I saw confusion. He defended himself quickly, citing practicality, responsibility, marriage. I listened without retreating. Submission would have meant retreat. Courage meant staying present. I told him understanding does not require agreement. I said protecting his future did not justify erasing my past. I did not accuse. I stated. That difference mattered. Accusation invites defense. Truth invites exposure. I also reached outside myself for the first time. I spoke to a friend afterward, voice still shaking. I named what had happened. Numbing felt dangerous. It also felt real. She listened without judgment. She did not rush to comfort me with excuses. She said what I had avoided hearing. Love does not cancel rights. That sentence changed something in me. I realized how long I had confused self-sacrifice with morality. I contacted a legal advisor, not to threaten, but to understand. Knowledge felt like oxygen. Each step terrified me. I imagined losing my son entirely. I imagined him choosing distance over accountability. Fear followed me everywhere. Still, I moved forward. Self-respect does not wait for permission. I reminded myself that boundaries do not end love, they reveal its shape. If love collapses under honesty, it was already fragile. That thought steadied me. I was not rebelling. I was correcting a long imbalance that silence had allowed to grow unchecked. When we spoke again, I felt different, not stronger, clearer. I told him I would not consent quietly. I told him I needed acknowledgement, not favors. I said staying in the house as a guest was unacceptable. I said dignity requires agency. These words felt heavy but necessary. I did not threaten. I did not beg. I stated needs. For the first time, I treated myself as someone worth protecting. That alone felt revolutionary. Maternal instinct still pulled at me, urging retreat, urging softness. I acknowledged it without obeying it. Love can coexist with boundaries. I learned that late, but not too late. I told him I loved him without qualifying myself. I refused to trade love for silence. Fear lingered, but courage held space beside it. They existed together. That surprised me. Courage did not erase fear. It walked with it, steady and deliberate. The conversation ended without resolution. That frightened me. Yet I felt something unfamiliar, relief. Speaking had returned my shape. I was no longer folded inward. Whatever came next would be faced awake. I had crossed an internal threshold. Submission had kept peace, but it had cost me everything. Courage risked loss, but it offered dignity. I chose dignity, trembling, uncertain, and finally present. I knew his reaction would come next. Defense, exposure, or reckoning. I could not control that. I could only control my voice. I had found it again. Whatever followed would no longer happen without me standing inside it, visible and unwilling to disappear quietly again. The confrontation did not explode the way I once imagined. It burned instead, slow and relentless, like something that had been smoldering for years finally allowed air. When we spoke again, the room felt smaller, tighter, as if walls leaned in to listen. Power sat unevenly between us. He held legality, I held memory. That imbalance shaped every word. I felt it immediately. Yet for the first time, I did not retreat. I stayed present, even when my hands shook. Comfort had been built on my silence. Accountability demanded discomfort. I chose discomfort deliberately. He began defensively, listing reasons like shields. Marriage, security, responsibility. Words polished smooth by repetition. I listened without interrupting, noting how easily justification replaces reflection. When he finished, he looked relieved, as if logic itself had absolved him. That relief angered me more than cruelty ever could. I told him comfort gained through betrayal is still comfort, but it leaves a debt unpaid. I said integrity requires facing harm, not explaining it away. My voice surprised me. It was steady. That steadiness unsettled him more than shouting would have. He accused me then, softly, of not understanding modern realities, of being emotional, of refusing to adapt. Each accusation tried to return power to him. I felt old instincts rise, urging apology. I resisted. I said emotions are evidence, not weakness. I said adaptation does not mean erasure. I asked him if legality was the only language he respected. That question landed heavily. He did not answer immediately. Silence filled the room, thick and uncomfortable. For once, silence worked in my favor. It demanded reckoning instead of compliance. He raised his voice slightly, frustration breaking through composure. He said he had done nothing illegal. I agreed. That distinction mattered. Legal ownership, I said, does not equal ethical ownership. Laws measure rights. They do not measure gratitude, loyalty, or harm. He flinched at the word harm. I saw something shift then. Not remorse yet, but awareness. Awareness unsettles comfort. I pressed gently, not to punish, but to illuminate. I asked him if he believed survival years ago counted for nothing now. I asked if protection becomes irrelevant once it succeeds. The power imbalance became obvious. He could end the conversation. He could dismiss me. He could walk away legally untouched. I could not do the same. Yet moral reckoning does not require equal power. It requires honesty. I said that plainly. I said his comfort rested on a foundation built by my exhaustion. He had inherited stability without inheriting responsibility. That sentence cracked something. He looked away. I felt grief and resolve intertwine. I was not trying to win. I was trying to be seen. His wife entered the conversation then, not angrily, but firmly. She spoke of fairness, of futures, of what made sense. I listened, acknowledging her perspective without surrendering mine. I said fairness without context is hollow. I said futures built on erased pasts carry hidden costs. She bristled. I saw how entitlement often wears calm certainty. I named that too carefully. The room grew tense. I feared losing them both. Fear whispered retreat. Integrity whispered stay. I stayed. The argument circled history and paperwork, love and obligation. Accusations surfaced, old resentments revealed. He admitted he had felt burdened by my dependence. That hurt deeply. I admitted I had depended because I believed family meant mutual care. We stared at each other across that truth. Comfort demanded forgetting it. Accountability demanded acknowledging it. I chose acknowledgement, even as it broke my heart. I said dependence is not shameful when it grows from shared sacrifice. I said abandonment disguised as independence leaves scars. He absorbed that silently. At one point, he asked what I wanted. The question surprised us both. I paused, considering. I said I wanted recognition. I wanted agency. I wanted my contribution named, not dismissed. I wanted decisions that affected my life to include my voice. The simplicity of it stunned him. He had prepared for demands, not dignity. That realization exposed how far the imbalance had gone. I was no longer asking for shelter. I was asking for respect. That difference mattered profoundly. The confrontation stretched long, exhausting everyone. Tears appeared, not dramatic but heavy. He accused me of guilt tripping him. I said guilt arises when truth is avoided. Accountability is not punishment. It is responsibility. I reminded him that comfort without conscience eventually rots. I spoke not as a mother protecting a child, but as a woman protecting herself. That shift frightened him. I saw it clearly. He had never needed to consider who I was beyond mother. Now he had to. That was the reckoning. Legal arguments resurfaced. Papers were mentioned. Deadlines implied. I acknowledged reality. I said I understood the law. I said understanding does not equal acceptance. Ethical ownership, I explained, means recognizing who carried cost and who reaped benefit. It means repairing harm, not hiding behind permission granted under pressure. The word pressure hung between us. He knew it was true. Silence confirmed it. The imbalance had coerced consent. That realization changed the tone. Defense softened. Something vulnerable surfaced. He asked quietly if I would take legal action. I told him I hoped it would not come to that. I said reconciliation requires accountability, not avoidance. I said I wanted resolution that allowed us to look at each other honestly. That honesty terrified me more than any court, yet it was necessary. Comfort built on betrayal demands confrontation eventually. Integrity built on accountability offers repair. I chose repair, knowing it might fail. The conversation ended unresolved but altered. Something irreversible had occurred. Power no longer flowed one way. Moral reckoning had entered the room and refused to leave. I felt drained but grounded. I had spoken truths long buried. Consequences now waited. He would have to choose between convenience and conscience. I could not choose for him. I could only choose myself. That choice had been made. As days passed, tension lingered. Communication grew careful, distance threatened. I prepared for outcomes I could not control. Reconciliation, legal separation, emotional loss, each possibility carried grief. Yet none carried shame. That mattered. Integrity had replaced submission. Whatever came next would be built on truth, not silence. The turning point approached quietly, demanding decision. Comfort or accountability, he would choose soon. So would I if forced. The story was no longer mine alone. It stood at the edge of resolution, waiting. Resolution did not arrive with ceremony. It came quietly over time, like strength returning to a limb long unused. The house remained uncertain, tied up in conversations, documents, pauses. But something else shifted first. I began to hear my own voice again, steady and present, no longer apologizing for its existence. Property was still in question. Dignity was not. That distinction changed everything. I stopped measuring my worth by square footage and started measuring it by how I stood in rooms where I once shrank. I learned quickly that independence does not mean isolation. It means choosing where to stand. I no longer waited for permission to speak. I stated needs calmly, without justification. Some were met, some were not. Either way, I remained whole. Loss of property felt real, heavy, undeniable, yet it no longer defined me. I understood then that survival had trained me to endure, but healing required something else entirely, self-recognition. I was no longer surviving quietly. I was living deliberately, even amid uncertainty and grief. My son and I spoke less during that time. Distance replaced tension. At first, that hurt deeply. I had feared distance more than injustice for years. Now I saw distance differently. It was space for reflection, not punishment. I allowed it. I used it. I stopped chasing reconciliation at the cost of myself. That choice felt radical. Maternal instinct still whispered sacrifice. I listened, thanked it, and set it aside. Independence demands restraint as much as courage. I was learning both, slowly, imperfectly, but honestly. The house remained unresolved. Papers moved. Conversations stalled. I prepared myself for any outcome. That preparation surprised me. Fear no longer controlled me. I had already lost what mattered most, silence as protection. I would not lose myself again. I sought counsel, asked questions, learned rights. Knowledge replaced panic. Even if the house was gone, I would not be erased. That realization felt like victory, quiet and profound. Moral victory does not always reclaim property. Sometimes it reclaims posture, breath, presence. Friends noticed the change before I did. They said I spoke differently. I listened differently too. I no longer minimized my experience, I named it. Betrayal no longer felt taboo. I stopped protecting others from discomfort. That shift freed me. I did not become bitter, I became clear. Clarity is gentler than bitterness and far more powerful. I began to imagine a future not defined by loss, but by choice. That imagination felt fragile but real. When my son eventually reached out, his tone had changed. Not apologetic, not defensive, reflective. He spoke of confusion, regret, pressure. I listened without surrendering myself. I told him I loved him without conditions. I also told him love does not require self-erasure. Those truths coexisted. That was new. Our relationship would never return to what it was. I accepted that. Growth reshapes connection. Sometimes it narrows it. Sometimes it deepens it differently. I was no longer afraid of that change. The house decision came later, quietly. Compromise, not restoration. I felt sadness, but not devastation. I had already reclaimed something larger. Dependence had loosened its grip. I began planning my next chapter, modest but mine. I chose spaces that fit me, not memories. I honored the past without living inside it. Letting go felt deliberate, not forced. That mattered. Loss hurts less when it is chosen consciously, even if circumstances push you there. I stopped introducing myself solely as a mother. I remembered other parts of me. Worker, survivor, woman with opinions. That reclamation felt revolutionary. Years of sacrifice had narrowed my identity. Boundaries widened it again. I took pride in small acts of independence, signing my own lease, managing my own accounts, choosing quiet mornings without guilt. These were not victories others noticed. They were mine. They mattered deeply. Independence does not shout. It settles. The moral victory revealed itself slowly. I no longer felt ashamed of wanting fairness. I no longer apologized for pain I did not cause. I recognized how easily love becomes leverage when one person carries all responsibility. I vowed never to accept that arrangement again. Not with family, not with anyone. Boundaries became acts of care, not rejection. I practiced them daily. Some days I failed. Most days I improved. Progress replaced perfection. That felt humane. Time softened sharp edges. The anger dulled into understanding, not justification. Understanding. I understood my son's fear of responsibility. I understood my own fear of abandonment. Understanding did not erase harm, it contextualized it. That allowed me to move forward without bitterness. Forgiveness, I learned, is not reunion. It is release. I released the need for repayment. I did not release self-respect. That balance took time. I honored that process without rushing it. The house still visits me in dreams. Walls, light, familiar sounds, I wake without panic. Memory no longer threatens my present, I carry it gently. The house taught me endurance. Loss taught me boundaries. Together they shaped a wiser version of me. I am not diminished by what I lost. I am expanded by what I reclaimed. My voice carries further now. My posture is different. My silence is chosen, not enforced. Material loss hurts. Moral victory heals, dependence limits, independence frees. These contrasts define my resolution. I did not win everything. I did not lose myself. That outcome felt honest. It felt earned. As time passed, dust settled. Relationships adjusted. Life continued. I stood inside it, visible and intact. That was enough, more than enough. I tell this story now not to accuse, but to clarify. Motherhood is often praised for sacrifice, yet rarely protected from exploitation. We are taught that love means endless giving, that silence proves devotion, that endurance equals virtue. I believed that for decades. It nearly erased me. Love should not require disappearance. Care should not demand surrender of dignity. A mother's heart is strong, but strength is not permission for others to take without consequence. What we give willingly still deserves respect. What we build with our lives should not be taken casually, explained away, or reduced to paperwork alone. I speak to mothers who recognize themselves in quiet rooms and unthanked labor. If you have ever shrunk to keep peace, questioned your worth to protect love, or confused patience with obligation, this story is also yours. Love and entitlement are not the same. Sacrifice and self-erasure are not synonyms. When giving becomes expected, it stops being love and becomes extraction. Boundaries do not mean bitterness. They mean clarity. They teach others how to treat us. Without them, even family can forget our humanity. And forgetting humanity always begins where silence replaces truth and fear replaces voice inside families. I loved my son unconditionally, and I always will. That love did not disappear when I chose myself. It matured. Unconditional love does not mean unconditional access. It does not excuse harm or erase accountability. A mother can love fiercely and still say no. She can forgive without forgetting. She can nurture without disappearing. When we teach children that love has no limits, we risk teaching them that other people do not matter. Real love carries responsibility. Real gratitude is active. It protects the hands that once held everything together. That protection must flow both directions to remain love intact. I no longer believe suffering is proof of goodness. Pain does not sanctify exploitation. Endurance is not a moral requirement. These beliefs kept me quiet and kept others comfortable. Comfort built on another person's silence is not peace. It is theft with manners. Mothers deserve safety, recognition, and agency, not just praise. We deserve to age without fear of displacement, to speak without guilt, to rest without apology. Respect should not be something we earn after decades of giving. It should exist from the beginning, quietly, consistently, and without condition in families, communities, and systems that rely on maternal labor. If this story leaves you uncomfortable, let it. Discomfort is often the first sign of truth. Ask who benefits from silence. Ask who pays for harmony. Ask whose labor becomes invisible once it succeeds. These questions matter. They shape families and futures. I am not asking for blame. I am asking for awareness. For conversations that happen before harm. For boundaries that protect love instead of testing it. When mothers are respected, families are stronger. When they are erased, damage spreads quietly, patiently, and generationally. Ignoring this truth ensures repetition of harm across time through silence and misplaced loyalty alone. I did not lose everything. I lost a house perhaps, but I reclaimed myself. That trade changed me. I stand differently now. I speak without apology. I love with boundaries. I no longer confuse sacrifice with worth. My story is not unique, but it is complete. It ends with clarity, not bitterness. Love remains, but it is no longer weaponized against me. That is what healing looks like. Quiet, firm, honest. A mother standing whole, finally seen by herself, without needing permission, validation, approval, or silence from anyone ever again, including family systems, traditions, expectations, and inherited fear patterns globally. This is what a mother deserves: love without erasure, gratitude without negotiation, and limits honored without punishment. We are not foundations to be built over and forgotten. We are living histories. When we stop disappearing, stories change. Children learn accountability. Families learn balance. Futures become kinder. If my voice reaches you, carry it forward. Protect the mothers around you. And if you are one, protect yourself. Your love is powerful. Make sure it is never used to erase you again. Because survival alone is not the goal, dignity is. And every mother deserves both, fully respected always without fear remaining.